이스라엘 선교 전문 방송 브레드 TV에서 매년 봄과 가을에 진행하고 있는 이스라엘 회복 순례가 2016년 가을에도 출발합니다.
지금은 엘리야 때처럼 주 말씀이 선포되고
사랑해요 이스라엘.
주의 종 모세의 때와 같이 언약이 성취되네. 전쟁과 기근과 비판
2016년 가을에도 역시 이스라엘을 처음 가는 분들을 위한 올리브 코스와 이스라엘의 색다른 장소, 색다른 경험을 원하는 분들을 위한 무화과 코스 두 차례 진행됩니다. 9월 12일부터 8박 9일간 진행되는 올리브 코스는 예수님이 태어나신 베들레헴, 예수님이 사역하셨던 갈릴리 호수, 또 예수님이 눈물로 기도하셨던 겟세마네 동산과 십자가를 지고 가셨던 고난의 길, 그리고 골고다 언덕 같은 기본적인 성지 코스는 물론이고 핍박과 고난 속에서도 신앙을 지키고 있는 메시아닉주 교회에 가서 그들의 손을 잡고 위로하며 예배를 드리고 또 영화 회복의 주인공들을 만나 그들이 얼마나 간절하게 예수님을 믿는지 간증을 직접 들으며 그들의 손을 잡고 함께 중보 기도를 하는 시간을 가지려고 합니다. 9월 19일부터 8박 9일간 진행되는 무화과 코스는 역시 기본적인 성지 코스를 방문하는 것뿐만 아니라 예루살렘 중심에 있는 기도타워를 방문해 예루살렘을 한눈에 내려다보며 정말 예루살렘의 평화를 위해서 기도하고 또 메시아닉주 교회에서 그들과 함께 예배를 드릴 것입니다. 좀 더 특별한 이스라엘을 체험하기 위해서 예루살렘의 재래시장을 방문하여 그들의 생활과 문화를 이해하는 시간도 가지려고 합니다. 네게브 사막의 베두인 텐트 아래에서 모닥불을 피워놓고 벌어지는 메시아닉주와 함께하는 찬양과 간증의 밤은 아마 여러분에게 평생 잊지 못할 진한 감동과 은혜의 시간을 선사하게 될 것입니다. 제가 만든 이스라엘 영화를 이스라엘 현지에서 관람하고 그 촬영 현장과 영화의 출연자들을 만나는 시간, 그리고 그 현장에서 들려주는 하나님의 놀라운 역사의 간증들을 들려드릴 것입니다. 저와 함께 떠나는 이스라엘 회복 순례는 기존의 성지 순례와는 그 차원이 다르죠. 이스라엘은 더 이상 관광이나 순례의 대상이 아닙니다. 우리의 기도와 관심이 필요한 대상이죠. 그런데도 과거의 유적지만 돌아다니며 사진만 찍다가 오는 성지 순례를 하시겠습니까? 아니면 현재 하나님께서 이스라엘을 통해서 어떻게 역사하고 계신지 그 현장을 직접 확인하는 시간을 갖고 이스라엘을 위해서 기도하는 시간을 가지시겠습니까? 여행은 어디를 가느냐도 중요하지만 누구와 함께 가느냐가 더 중요하죠. 여러분, 저와 함께 이스라엘 가시죠. 제가 여러분을 이스라엘로 안내하겠습니다.
This week on Jerusalem Dateline, persecution of Christians in the Middle East is at historic levels, but some are asking, where is the church in the West?
The pulpits in America have largely been silent on this issue of their fellow brethren around the world.
Plus, the story of an ex-ISIS fighter who came to faith in Jesus. And find out more about God, Israel, and you. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. We're coming to this week from just outside the Jaffa Gate here at the walls of the Old City. As ISIS continues its genocide against Middle East Christians, reports of crucifixions are on the rise. But some religious leaders are wondering when the church in the West will step up and speak out about this historic persecution. From world leaders to authors on the front lines to Christian humanitarians, the alarm is going out over the plight of Christians in countries besieged by ISIS.
Daesh is responsible for genocide against groups in areas under its control, including Yazidis, Christians, and Shia Muslims.
We're hearing of more and more crucifixions. We're hearing of young boys being killed.
We're witnessing a once in a 2,000-year crisis, and it's not an exaggeration to say that we could see the elimination of Christianity in the place of its birth.
Even though the church in the Middle East is suffering genocide, some say the church in the West could do more to stand with their fellow believers. Christian activist Johnny Moore has been working with big names such as Mark Burnett and Roma Downey to bring attention to this tragedy.
But we're blind again, just like we were blind at the Holocaust, just like we were blind at the Rwanda genocide, the Bosnian genocide, the Armenian genocide. We're not learning. But what's even more sort of shameful and despicable about this is we are the strongest religious community in the world as Christians, and the church isn't even speaking up in the way it could.
Some believe the lack of action in the American church lies in the pulpit, not the pews.
The pulpits in America have largely been silent on this issue of their fellow brethren around the world.
Historian David Barton collaborated with pollster George Barna on a nationwide survey of Christian conservatives. They asked pastors and parishioners about 22 specific issues. Results showed parishioners put religious persecution as their number 2 area of special interest. 86% wanted more information on the issue. The same subject, however, didn't even register with their pastors as a topic to address with congregations.
So you've got 86% of American Christians saying we need to hear about this, we've got to be informed on it, and pastors saying, don't think I want to talk about that. So there's this real dichotomy right now on persecution in American churches, at least addressing the subject. And certainly if you start addressing the subject, then you're more likely to do something about it. And that's really what Christians in the Middle East need, is they need outside help. They can't save themselves. It's going to take outside help.
People like this Christian woman need that help. As ISIS plowed across Iraq, she and her family fled their Christian village of Karakosh.
Until now, we can't even imagine this happening to us. It's like a dream. Everything was so normal. Our life was so comfortable, and suddenly everything changed.
Changed by terrorists with a deadly goal.
They don't want any Christians to live in Iraq. They want to kill them all or have them leave or become a Muslim.
Tom Doyle, who has worked with the persecuted church for years, says the church needs to open their hearts and eyes.
We need the pastors to speak up. This is your family. And I know what it's like to be a pastor, because I did that for 20 years, and so many times you're so consumed with the things within your four walls, but we're connected around the world. We are completely connected, and this is family. They may worship a little different from us, they may look different, they may speak a different language, but they love Jesus with their whole heart.
Ironically, the Jewish community is filling the void.
It's sort of nonsensical, but history repeats itself. One of the great allies for the displaced and persecuted Christians in the Middle East presently is the Jewish community. As the Jewish community sees a repetition of history. It was the Simon Wiesenthal Center, a center that specializes in the study of genocide, that first said it was genocide against Christians in the Middle East.
I'm hearing this from Jewish rabbis who are saying, we appreciate the support, we appreciate you siding Israel. Guys, you got to save Christians, you got to stop this genocide. So it's amazing that Jews who have been through this and who get reminded of it, things like Yad Vashem, and it's all around the country, they're saying, Americans, Christians, wake up. You got to save the Christians that are having the same Holocaust that we went through. And I find that powerful when it's being delivered by Jews who have been through it themselves, and they're now saying, Christians, wake up, it's your turn.
We got to help these people the way we hope someone would help us. We have to pray for them the way we hope someone would pray for us. We have to give to them the way we hope someone would give to us. And we have to speak up for them the way we hope someone would speak up for us.
While ISIS gets the lion's share of attention in terms of Christian persecution, it's still prevalent in areas where radical Islam is dominant. Here's a story about a girl who's been in a Pakistani prison for 7 long years on the charge of blasphemy against the Prophet Muhammad. And even in prison, Asia Bibi fears for her life. In this exclusive TV interview, Gary Lane talks with her family about her ordeal and how they're depending on their faith in God.
It's been more than 2,500 days since Hisham Bibi or her sister Isha has spent time shopping or cooking a meal with their mother Asia. They still hope one day to return to a normal family life.
I have strong faith, and I believe that my mother will be out of jail soon.
We first met the sisters and their father Ashik Masih in 2011 as they played a popular Pakistani board game. As they attempted to carry on life, wife and mother Asia Bibi sat alone in a prison cell. She faced death by hanging, charged with blasphemy against the Muslim prophet Muhammad. Little did they realize that in 2016, they'd still be waiting for a family reunion. Ashik told me while these 7 years have been difficult, he has faith that his wife will be released.
I still believe she will be freed soon, and I trust a lot in the prayers.
Prayers and petitions like this one signed by nearly 700,000 people from around the world. Still, Asia remains incarcerated, and her husband Ashik fears for her life.
She is in danger because many Islamic organizations and clerics are still demanding that she be hanged.
Confined to a small prison cell in Multan, Pakistan, Asia Bibi cooks her own meals out of fear that radical Islamists may try to poison her. She also cleans her own cell to limit the risk of direct contact with prison personnel. Isham and Isha visit Asia regularly, but they cannot reach beyond the narrow, restrictive prison bars to hug or even touch their mother.
My mother's faith in God is still strong. 2 months ago when I saw her, she was in good health. She told me that we must pray, and I told my mother that she must pray as well. Prayer is very important to us.
Islamic extremists have also threatened their family, forcing them to change their housing. That makes it difficult for the girls to socialize and maintain lasting relationships.
It is very hard to move from place to place. It has a very bad effect on our lives.
So far, attempts to win Asia's release have been thwarted. About a year ago, the nation's highest court questioned the evidence against her and overturned her death sentence. The court ordered a reinvestigation, but further action has been delayed. That's because of the arrest and hanging death of assassin Mumtaz Qadri. The radical Islamist gunned down Punjab Governor Salman Taseer, who called for Pakistan's blasphemy law to be abolished after visiting Asia in prison. Islamists packed the streets after the government finally executed Qadri under the country's anti-terrorism laws. Wilson Chowdhury heads the group British Pakistani Christians.
There was a huge backlash. There was protests across the country. There was a mass camp outside government buildings in Islamabad where people refused to move until the government cancelled all the proposed reforms for change of the blasphemy laws of Pakistan, and they called for the immediate death sentence, the killing of Asia Bibi under her death sentence.
Pakistani legal expert Joseph Francis says it's very easy to accuse someone of blasphemy here, and cases have increased every year since 9/11.
In Pakistan, no justice, because the court is very biased.
Either biased against the country's tiny Christian minority or intimidated by extremists, says Chowdhury.
I don't think there's anyone brave enough to release Asia Bibi. What judge is going to be brave enough to say, Asia, you can go free, knowing that that would mean a potential death sentence for him?
How about an amendment to the blasphemy law? What are the chances of that passing?
All Pakistani government, previously and present, this is not possible, change this law. Present government have, I don't believe, because maybe in some government coming to the next time.
In the meantime, more Christians like Asia Bibi will face false accusations of blasphemy and the likelihood of wasting away in prison. And more daughters, like Isha and Isham, will grow up without their mother's loving embrace.
I'm always praying that God will release my mother from jail so our family can be reunited and she can live a peaceful life. American young people, please keep praying for me, my family, and mother, that God will help us resume our family life.
Gary Lane, CBN News, Lahore, Pakistan.
Up next, hear the story of a former ISIS member and what turned his life around. As I mentioned, we're coming to you from just outside the Jaffa Gate, here in the walls of the old city. They call it the Jaffa Gate because it leads to the port of Jaffa. And if you went there and set sail, you're not too far from the shores of Europe. Right now, that continent is facing unprecedented threat from ISIS infiltrations. Not too long ago, I sat down with a pastor outside Vienna, Austria, and we talked with an ex-ISIS member. And with his help by phone call, we went inside the terrorist organization. Several years ago, Pastor Ghassan Thomas escaped Baghdad when Islamists threatened him and his family. He went to Turkey and started a church that reached out to other refugees.
And I go everywhere because I was a refugee, and I can put myself in their shoes and understand them.
One day, ISIS sent a spy into Pastor Thomas's church. While this led to a life-changing decision for the spy, it also led to an opportunity for Pastor Thomas to learn more about the terror group. Thomas set up a phone call for CBN News with this man we'll call Mohammed. For his safety, we won't disclose his true identity or location.
Welcome, my dear brother.
Were you with ISIS or Daesh?
Yes, but he's worried about that because he said that on interview, but yes.
Thomas told us Mohammed's job within the organization. When ISIS killed a family inside their house, Mohammed would go back and kill anyone who was still alive.
At that time, that's how I thought. I thought of killing. I thought of doing many bloody things just to be close to my Allah.
He says this bloodlust motivates ISIS.
For sure, there will be more and more since it's in the Quran. If you're not a Muslim, you need to be a Muslim, or we will kill you and take everything, finances, women, and everything. This is in the Quran.
Fighting between Sunni ISIS and Shiite militias often put Mohammed's own life in danger. For his safety, family members told him to flee Iraq to Turkey. As a devout Muslim, he obeyed his parents, and the opportunity to leave came when ISIS sent him as a spy into Pastor Thomas's church. But Mohammed had his own questions about Jesus.
I saw the people how they welcomed me, and they didn't even know me. I hated those people, and they showed me love.
They prayed for Mohammed, and it changed his life.
When they prayed for me, I started to cry like a child, and I felt like something very heavy was coming out of my body. At the end of the service, I went home, and it seemed like someone was walking with me, talking to me. I felt like I wasn't on the earth. I felt like I was flying, like someone was carrying me.
Then Mohammed read the Bible and compared it to the Quran.
I went there and discovered that the God that I want is the God Jesus Christ. He is the right God.
Pastor Thomas says Mohammed's change of heart means the church in Europe needs more workers.
For this reason, we need some people come and serve God here in Europe with the refugees, just to wake them up, to be against what ISIS do.
This former ISIS member expects more attacks like Brussels and delivered a warning for Europe. Do you think there's a great danger to Europe right now?
For sure. It's a huge thing. They should wake up.
Coming up, hear why millennials need to know more about Israel and why they may not be getting the full story. The story of Israel is one of the most miraculous in modern times, yet it's also one of the most controversial, especially for millennials. Recently, I talked with author Michael Onifer, who addressed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in his new book called God, Israel, and You. Michael, you've written a book, God, Israel, and You. Why'd you write it?
Well, I spent the last 10 years cultivating a message on Israel to young people, to millennials, and an opportunity presented itself for me to put that in book format, and the result of it is God, Israel, and You.
And what's the main message you're trying to communicate through the book?
The main message is that Israel isn't about Israel, that Israel's about God, that understanding Israel and the Jewish people and what's happening here in this land today and in this region ultimately has to do with the knowledge of God and our personal, intimate relationship with Jesus.
And why so important to reach millennials? What's happening among them right now?
Well, what we're seeing is that when millennials hear a message on Israel that they can connect with, they get it. Because God set a plan in motion. God has a redemptive plan, and we exist within redemptive history.
What kind of response have you got from millennials who have read your book or seen?
Well, two of the elements that are within the book that I've seen the strongest response from both have to do with the Arab world. So the Arab world at large and the Palestinian community, because the book deals with that issue directly, and it fully displays the heart that I have for the Palestinians, and it addresses what's happening, and it helps young Christians deal with this issue from a perspective of biblical and historical context. The other thing that it does is it takes the Arab people and it puts them within their redemptive purpose. A lot of times you have people that have a challenge with certain leaders in the body of Christ that speak about the Arab community as if they're cursed. And that's not God's heart. And this book talks about that.
That's a pretty big narrative right now, I guess a pretty big issue among millennials, this whole Arab, Israeli, Palestinian conflict. And what specifics how do you address that?
If we're going to look at this in the context of an all-knowing, almighty God, creator of the universe, we also have to take into account that there are spiritual dynamics at play. And so it invites believers to critically think about the spiritual dynamics that are at work so they can do what can be a hard job, a difficult job of separating an individual from an ideology. So when I go to the checkout counter at Walmart and there's a young woman there in a hijab, what is my heart towards that individual? And what is my understanding of Islam? And being able to understand that there's a difference and we need to be able to appreciate both.
You talked about the redemptive purpose for the Arab people. What is that?
When I see the world, I see, because of God's redemptive plan, because of the covenants that He has in the Bible, there are two people groups in the earth that I feel are the most important to God's plan, and that's the Jewish people, and because of the Jewish people, the Palestinians and the Arabs. And the way that they relate to each other adds significance to them, but I believe their purpose is the same purpose that you and I have, is to know Jesus and to identify with Jesus and His kingdom more than we identify with any personal or political narrative.
What impact do you hope the book would have?
I hope that it takes that first simple yet profound step of helping a believer understand that Israel and the Jewish people has to do with the heart of Jesus, that this is not a peripheral issue, but God in His wisdom has bound His plans and His redemptive purposes to this land and to the Jewish people, and that they will begin to submit their ideas for what is effective ministry and what their purposes in God's economy looks like to His, that they will prioritize their lives according to the priorities that God reveals in the Bible, especially as it relates to Israel and the Jewish people.
I can remember many years ago, Michael, being right around here, not too far from here, with Derek Prince, the Bible teacher from many years ago. And one of the first questions I asked him was, Derek, why support Israel? And he said, well, because God supports Israel. And would you say that's a similar message?
What Derek Prince said is something that I believe wholeheartedly. And he said, if you don't understand Israel, you can't understand the Bible. And if we're misunderstanding the Bible, we're misunderstanding God. And so Israel could very well make the difference between Western believers worshiping a Western conception of Jesus versus the biblical Jesus.
Up next, see the touching story of how a couple who survived the Holocaust got a helping hand. The story of modern Israel and the Holocaust are linked together. Many survivors came here to Israel and helped build a nation. But many of those survivors are elderly now, and life can be hard. That's why when CBN found out that Michael and Vera Stolyar's appliances began breaking, they stepped in to help.
Michael and Vera have been married for more than 60 years. During that time, they've helped each other cope with painful memories of the Holocaust.
The sounds of the bombs were terrifying. We escaped Ukraine to Tajikistan. The rest of my family that could not leave were killed with the other Jews, their bodies all dumped in a giant pit.
I was 10 years old when the Nazis began bombing my village in Moldova, and I thought the world was coming to an end.
While Vera and her family helped care for Soviet soldiers in Tajikistan, Michael and his family endured a 3-month death march to a ghetto in Ukraine. They met in Ukraine after the war and moved to Hadera, Israel in 1995. Michael worked as a street cleaner until he was in his 70s. Their children can't afford to help them, so they struggle just to buy food.
We lived paycheck to paycheck and never could save much money. I cooked our food on the same electric hot plate for years, but it broke, and we just can't afford to replace it.
When CBN Israel found out about Michael and Vera, we bought them a brand new electric hot plate and a convection oven. And every week, we take them groceries.
It's fantastic. All the things you have given us. We really appreciate the support and everything that you are doing to help.
We are so very grateful. We are not used to people giving us things. We are very appreciative for each item. We have everything we could possibly need. Thank you.
That is a touching story. Well, that's it for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.